குப்பையிலே ஒரு காதியும் ஒரு பத்திரிகையாளருமான சகோதரர் ஃபரீலை பார்க்கிறேன். நிச்சயமாக அவருக்கு என்னுடைய உரையின் தமிழாக்கத்தை கொடுத்து அவருடைய பத்திரிகையில் அதை பிரசுரிக்க வைத்தால் இலகுவாக இருக்கும் என்று நான் நினைக்கிறேன். அவருக்கும் நாங்கள் நன்றி சொல்ல வேண்டும் என்றால் தொடர்ந்தும் ஒரு கொலம் எழுதி கொண்டு வருகிறார் பத்திரிகையில். இந்த நாட்டிலே காதி நீதிமன்ற விவகாரங்கள் சம்பந்தமாக அவர் எழுதி வருகிற கொலம் அதில் எதுவும் சர்ச்சை இருக்கிறதோ இன்னும் தெரியாது. இருந்தாலும் மக்களை இது சம்பந்தமாக தெளிவுபடுத்துகிற விஷயத்தில் அவருடைய பங்களிப்பு சிறந்தது என்று சொல்லியாக வேண்டும். அதே நேரம் என்னுடைய இங்கு பாராளுமன்ற மொழிபெயர்ப்பாளர்கள் மொழிபெயர்த்து கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். அவருடைய வசதிக்காக என்னுடைய ஆங்கில உரையின் பிரதி அவர்களுக்கு அனுப்பி வைத்தேன். அதுவும் சில நேரம் நேரடி மொழிபெயர்ப்பு என்பது அவ்வளோ இலகுவான காரியம் அல்ல. இருந்தாலும் இந்த குறையை இவ்வாறு நிவர்த்திக்கலாம் என்று நான் நினைக்கிறேன். Ladies and gentlemen, I had the good fortune of having an advanced soft copy of the book that is to be launched today. And when I had a cursory look at the contents of the book, it was very fulfilling and satisfying experience. Then I was also somewhat concerned, having read Chulani's and Faizun's article. There were a few pot shots again at us, the Muslim politicians. So I needed to carefully prepare my speech. So, no, it's all in good spirits, and it's important that we must explain ourselves. I commence by expressing my appreciation of the singular privilege accorded to me by requesting me to make the keynote address at the launch of this erudite exploration of the rights of Muslim women of Sri Lanka. Women Claiming Rights and Spaces is the title of the book that is introduced today. The title implies that the women dealt with in this document are presently denied both their rights as well as their space in our vibrant, plural, democratic society. One claims what one is denied. However, the subtitle is more specific and a little more conciliatory. It explains that the book is about activism to reform Muslim personal law in Sri Lanka. To begin with, I must reassure all of you that I fully endorse the purpose of the book. I am in agreement with most of its contents. I hope to make this an opportunity to express my views both as a leader of the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress that is focused on Muslim perspective in national politics, and also as a Minister of Justice in a plural democracy such as ours. Given the stubborn insistence of the title and the mild explanatory tone of the subtitle, I am reminded of a brilliant prognosis made by a scholar and a great feminist, Gayatri Spivak. In her famous essay entitled, "Can the Subaltern Speak?" she says, "There is no virtue in global laundry lists with woman as a pious item. Representation has not withered away. The female intellectual, as intellectual, has a circumscribed task, which she must not disown with a flourish." End of quote. Let us now turn to the subject proper. The entire approach of the book covers familiar ground. It is all about the universality of human rights and the place of women. In the introduction, one comes across a startling conclusion that is indicative of the crusading spirit of this very bold initiative by the Muslim Women's Research and Action Forum. I refer to the statement that appears earlier on in the introduction. I quote, "Attempts at legislative reform of Muslim law have been unsuccessful due to a growing Muslim lobby which has preferred to see reform as an interference with the religious identity of the Muslim community and an attempt to tinker with the word of God. While I appreciate the sense of indignation and the reformist zeal contained in that statement, I would like to dispute its contention. Reform is a process. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on the 10th of December 1948. Reverend Martin Luther King was marching and chanting, "We shall overcome." The issue of segregation, even in the mid-60s. William Wilberforce, the evangelical Christian and member of Parliament, inspired his followers to form the Committee for the Abolition of Slave Trade in 1787. It took another 20 years for the Act of Abolition to get past the House of Commons in 1807. It took another 2.5 centuries for it to have its impact in the shining citadel of freedom as demonstrated in the town called Selma in the state of Alabama. While events unfold much faster in the 21st century, the reform process itself has the same traction and trajectory. The age of enlightenment and reason has not altered the basic instincts in human nature. Reforms are not brought about by legislation alone. It is far more complex. Reform needs to alter and redefine norms, values, attitudes, beliefs, roles, and responsibilities. It is about redrawing the contours of contemporary power relations in society. It is not about tinkering with the Word of God. It is about tinkering with minds of people who are either content or discontent, either satisfied or dissatisfied, willing to change or resisting change. The passage of reform legislation is achieved in the court of public opinion and not in the fairy tale land of altruistic dreams. Reforms need effective advocacy that could alter, reshape, erase, or influence public opinion. The distinction often made between Judeo-Christian approach to human rights and that of the Islamic approach to human rights is indeed fashionable, but absolutely preposterous. Almost all Islamic nations are signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenants on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Hence, the Islamic world is intrinsically committed to the universality of human rights the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam that was adopted and issued at the 19th Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers in Cairo on the 5th of August 1990 is explicit on the rights of women and children. I don't want to go into the details of it for want of time, but then one cursory glance at that declaration shows the level of commitment towards our women and children that is shown from that declaration. I must, however, confess that we do have a problem. We approach human rights, women's rights, and children's rights by attempting to determine the compatibility between universal norms and Islamic norms. From the point of view of Sharia, that is very often interpreted narrowly as a legal framework. We fail all too frequently to determine how the dictates of Sharia resonate with moral and ethical foundations of Islam. The introduction of this book states that, I quote, "Recent attempts by Muslim women to reform these laws so as to ensure justice and equality for women have, however, met with little success. In the face of identity-based politics, Muslim political parties which claim to represent the Muslim community in parliament have refused to take up the issue of Muslim personal law reform. We have consistently supported reforms." Now let me see, let me come to this. For fear, that is the most stinging part of it. For fear of progressive legal reform will alienate their vote bank, end of quote. I beg to disagree. There have been many attempts by Muslim legislators in parliament for reform. We have consistently supported reforms. This across-the-board indictment fails to address the complexities inherent in enacting reform-centric legislation. Let me give you some examples. I was trying to recollect as to how these assumptions came about. I must thank Chulani for having shared this book with me in advance so that I was able to defend myself at least. When I try to recollect as to how these assumptions perhaps have come to be formed, few incidents came to my mind. There was an attempt to decriminalize abortion. There was an attempt to criminalize marital rape, both leading with amendments to our penal code. To tell you very frankly, it was just not us Muslim members of parliament. All across the board, most of them Sinhala Buddhists, the Christian members, the Tamil members, all were equally upset and wanted to suggest changes because they felt that both these issues were culturally very sensitive. And to impose Western notions of these matters can be religiously also repugnant. So there were a lot of opposition. So finally we had to compromise. In the case of marital rape, we agreed marital rape can be part of the penal code provided it is only if it takes place only during judicial separation. Well, the reformists were not very happy. But that was how far we could go. It was not Muslim members alone, but others as well. Then, when it came to decriminalizing abortion, there again, the Catholic members asked the then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe for a conscience vote. Well, he saw the dangers in allowing a conscience vote, but he didn't want that to become a practice. Though he was inclined to do so, he discussed it with us. And finally, we decided that we will only allow decriminalizing abortion in cases of incest only. So that's now part of our penal code. So that was one. Then I also clearly remember a case. I mean, this perhaps was the more compelling reason for this assumption regarding the Muslim members of parliament would have come about. That was when the Parliamentary Select Committee was deliberating on making post-enactment judicial review possible. All of you know that right now in our constitution it's only pre-enactment review. See that because of the fear that it might go to virtually confirm that we are at least a semi-federal constitution. That was their worry. Most of us pro-devolution people, ever since the 13th Amendment, at least want everyone to accept that we are somewhat a quasi-federal setup in order to see that the center doesn't take away the powers which once it is devolved. So, but then this issue of judicial review got entangled in that. But while that was happening, one of our members, unfortunately, went and commented on the possibility of post-enactment review, if it is permitted, may even affect personal laws. And that was taken as a cue, and everybody forgot about the anti-devolution lobby and put the entire blame on Mr. Zuhair, who was then a member of parliament in the select committee along with me, and took him to task perhaps. And that is how this assumption perhaps would have come about. Because they felt that this is, I mean, I'm just going back to think as to where these assumptions could have been formed. So I thought I must explain that. Then when the Supreme Court disregarded AG versus Reed in Abhay Sundara versus Abhay Sundara, everybody agrees, and His Lordship also has critiqued that judgment. There are issues still, though it is considered settled law now, but then what happens to the issue of conscience? Right of conscience in the Constitution. So there has been several attempts to try and deal with these issues. But then, as Justice Masuf was speaking, I was going to even suggest to him, because perhaps, getting unanimity sometimes is not always possible. You can strive towards consensus. And that is what Islam says. Mashura is an issue of consensus. You listen. As a chair, you ultimately decide what is best and then leave the rest to God. Because if you strive to attain unanimity and think of reforms, sometimes it doesn't work. So, having said that, I don't want to take much of your time. Let me tell you that Islam appeals to the intimate conscience of the individual and to the intuitive judgment of the faithful. The Sharia is not a closed entity. It is based on a core of concepts, but an ensemble of precepts, which at times is precise, but is capable of expanding to include the totality of human acts through induction, analogy, extension, commentary, and interpretation. The great Muslim poet and philosopher Allama Muhammad Iqbal, his dictum is most relevant for our Muslim community in understanding the spirit of Islam in contemporary times. Iqbal finds Islam to be essentially humanistic and reformative. His formal arguments meet the principles of Islamic jurisprudence. Iqbal finds ijma as an inherent principle for change in formal religious interpretations. Ijtihad, which Chulani and Faizun have referred to in the article. These principles of movement and reform to adjust with an ever-changing reality is something that we can fall back on. It is also a democratic principle, as it is based on the popular opinion of the Muslim community. Therefore, I conclude by quoting Allama Iqbal, open quote, "Let the Muslim of today appreciate his position, reconstruct his social life in the light of ultimate principles, and evolve out of the hitherto partially revealed purpose of Islam, that spiritual democracy which is the ultimate aim of Islam." Thank you very much.